Welcome to the Comfortable in Chaos Podcast. Strangle your demons and let's go.
Y'all need Jesus!
I screamed my heart out just to make a dime. With that dime I bought your love, but now I realize I'm not your fool. Welcome to the Comfortable in Chaos Podcast. I am your host, Eric Hellberg, and you know we're like Einstein over here, men. We're just passionately curious about all things pertaining to men. How in the hell did we get here, and where is it that we want to go? Never take that away from a man. Ladies, never take being passionately curious away from a man. This is his world to explore, as it is yours. If you take that exploratory capability away from a man, and how does he find what he needs to conquer and or to provide to you? What is best for you? How to best surround you with the things that you desire and want, including himself, if you are going to take away his inner drive. It's a recipe for death. It's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe of finality for you, and you will end up alone. Where did we leave off? Friday for Saddam? I believe that was it. Saddam's Friday. Same thing, right? And women. We just gave a brief little interlude saying, women, take heed. And we're talking about the women here, right? That was the impetus for that last episode. And we left off. We left off with the Gulf War. We'd went a little bit askew, and then we moved forward. So we know that we had unfinished business, right? And the unfinished business was Saddam was still left in power. And just after 1988, evidently, he wasn't a good enough boy, and he needed to be invaded in 1991. Okay, well, how much longer did it take for us to go after him again? We did everything we could to hold him down. We used him as a boundary in the Middle East. We gave him just enough for his people to survive. And then we needed the death blow. Despite all the resentment that the Iraqis were feeling toward the Americans, the American leadership, primarily because there's good Iraqi citizens who are now Americans that are contributing to our society. But despite all that, we concocted a story, 2003, and after taking care of the cave dwellers initially in the first 3 months in Afghanistan, we know where that ended up, 20 plus years of misery, suffering, people enriching themselves only for us to turn that country back over, leave the Taliban just as we had found them, only in greater numbers, give them all of our monetary resources, give them all of our equipment, leave the infrastructure in place in places like Bagram so the Chinese can now be flying into a very improved and large airfield and setting up shop in the mineral and lithium-rich Afghanistan. Thank you, Joe. We appreciate that. So we concoct a story. It left a lot of egg on the face, even on good old Chairman Colin Powell, who had a lot of admiration and respect for, just simply because of his story, how he did rise up through the ranks. Maybe there was a little bit of affirmative action involved. I don't give a shit, because he was a very competent man, a good man. And then he basically went and said, they duped me on this yellow cake or uranium bullshit. Scott Ritter, the UN's inspector who they disavowed, kicked him out of the group because he said Iraq was of no threat. They went against his advice too. They had a narrative. They wanted to go to war. It was all under the good old guise of the new Patriot Act that swept in with totalitarian authority and efficiency after 9/11. No basis to go in 2003 what we did, and here was the end result. We went in, we initially mopped up some Baathists. That was the old regime that we utilized. We funded and utilized the Baathists. They fought against Iran for us. So now we had to go in, dismantle their army, destroy them, But what does that mean? A lot of new U.S. presence. Don't say coalition. That's a effing joke. A handful of people from other countries is not a coalition. This is U.S. led. And we take those dudes out. But the rest of the Muslims and the Arabs in the Middle East, they're not real happy about us sitting over there. Just like we're not real happy if they were to come and place everything of theirs here. It doesn't happen, does it? Monroe Doctrine, right? You cross that line, we're going to step off in your ass. So we just step off in everyone else's asses who can't really adequately defend themselves around the world. So we have an uprising. We have new insurgencies. We weren't expecting that at all. We get totally bogged down, and as the politicians like to say, it sounds so disingenuous. We lose, but it is true, a lot of blood and treasure. Really, they mean their pocketbooks. It's not their kids that are dying. We know Joe talks about Bo dying all the time, but it wasn't in war. He was a soldier who died later of cancer instead of war. So we now have to fight on the streets of every major city in Iraq. And it is mind-numbing, calculating, destructive work. And it leads to the proliferation of an organization called ISIS. ISIS. Then, of course, Barry came in. You know, once Barry came in, he had different names for it. He had ISI, ISIL. So, you know, there was good ISIS, there was bad ISIS. In fact, ISIS was so good for Barry that he would let them line up for 2-mile stretches for photo ops and their Toyota Hiluxes with their black flags, their Kalashnikovs up in the air. Best Air Force in the world, supposedly. And I mean, Barry has commented how he got really good at killing people. He loved killing people, especially in Yemen, especially in the Horn of Africa, of course in Afghanistan. But despite him being a very competent killer, Barry would not kill ISIS when we had what I would call as a mortarman troops in the open. Why would we not kill our enemies or troops in the open? That's amazing to me. So ISIS was allowed to go around the Middle East, wreak havoc. Now, this is where the protesters from the last episode and our women come into play. You guys keep protesting what's going on in Gaza. All you Islamists here in America, why did y'all never have an organized protest when ISIS was on the rampage? Burning people, dismembering people, cutting off their heads, setting women on fire. You know who they really like to set on fire? Were the Yazidi women. That name took a bit to come off the tip of my tongue. The Yazidi women. They especially prized them. Maybe because they signaled a different type of virtue to these animals, a different type of thought process, primarily Christian. Yeah, that's right. You just heard me say it. So they killed countless people, and for your protesters, they like throwing gay people off of roofs. That's not tolerated over there. They don't like women unless they are almost in pure bestiality mode, drug around and treated like an animal. And for these particular Yazidis, they would get these women, the videos are all still out there, put them in cages and set them on fire. So who were these Yazidis? Well, they were the Kurds. Remember, we would fight with the Northern Alliance and the Kurds. Our special forces would train the Kurds so they could help us fight our other enemies. In Iraq, during the militancy period, right? What they called the insurgents. They helped us. They helped us in Afghanistan. They were our allies. Of course, just like all of our allies of a different ethnic origin around the world, doesn't matter if it was the damn Montagnards in Vietnam, Doesn't matter if it's the Kurds in Iraq and Afghanistan. Once we get done with you, we just leave you. Wholesale slaughter. Oh yeah, just like half of the Afghan army that we trained, at least in 2023, helping us to fight the Taliban. Once we pulled out, half of them had all been killed, families too. It sounds like we are becoming more of a scourge than a benefit. So the Kurds, the Yazidis are Kurdish people. And we never saw one Islamic group, much less these illustrious women on college campuses now, decrying genocide in the Middle East while ISIS was on the rampage throughout everywhere. We created them, and they slaughtered countless tens and hundreds of thousands of people. But no mention of genocide. I guess if it's an Islamic group, they're cool. If it's an Israeli group, then we have to talk about genocide. Okay. Well, we're talking about the Yazidi women getting burned up. Ultimately, all that culminated under Barry's tutelage. And after they had been killed en masse in the open, per se, all the Yazidis were cornered on Mount Sinjar. Approximately 300 and something thousand of them were up at the highest point of that mountain as ISIS was closing in. It was their last point of refuge. So, and of course, they're defending themselves. But since ISIS couldn't get in and obliterate them and do God knows what to them, immediately they cut off all resources to them. In the scorching desert heat, many of them died of malnutrition, dehydration, starvation. Ultimately, other countries' aerial reconnaissance caught a hold of this, and Obama couldn't keep it quiet anymore. So all they simply allowed to do instead of decimating ISIS was allow a portal to be created, a means of ingress and egress to get these people in and out. Of course, no cries of genocide. These are Christian people being killed by Muslims. No cries of genocide. Did you know one of the groups that came to help the Yazidis was actually part of Bashar Assad's army? Oh yeah, the Syrian dictator that we wanted to topple, he had a soft spot in his heart for those Christian Yazidis. But we want him gone too. Been working on it an awful long time. That's why we created one faction of ISIS. Whole other story, whole other episode for another day. The point to it all is there were no cries of their plight. And never in America, with all of our broadcast media, have you ever seen a pronounced Muslim group decry what Muslims do to everyone in the Middle East and or everyone different in the Middle East. It is only Israel. So in fact, after 8 years of disaster, moving back to Iraq, from 2003 under false pretenses to 2011, unbelievable bloodshed. I don't know how many Iraqi citizens killed. And we know there were some indiscriminate killing. Part of that's warfare. Part of it's not. In Iraq, we essentially pulled out of there. Anyone who supported us, bye-bye, and or make a mass exodus to other places. We allowed ISIS at that time to then have any of the things that we left, a lot of advanced weapon systems, caches of cash that we had seized from Saddam that were still in country. When we pulled out of there after purportedly fighting the insurgency, ISIS now had access to everything and became, at that time, the most, including oil, the oil that we never tapped into to benefit the American people that was one of the pretenses for war. We gave them access to that too. Great way to raise capital. So almost overnight, ISIS became one of the most armed and well-funded terrorist groups. Now, keep in mind, Islamic and terrorist group. Are there any others? the most well-armed and well-funded Islamic terrorist group in the world. And they were allowed to proliferate. Thank you, Barry. Not until Donald Trump came into office and worked hand in hand with who? Good old Vladimir. Did you know that ISIS was scared shitless of the Russians? Oh, yeah, baby. They weren't afraid of us. They knew we could do them great harm, and we did when we were allowed to operate. But they knew that old Putin and that Russian bear will eat you alive. Doesn't matter if you play dead. And they have claws that can just dismember you. And they went in there surgically in conjunction with our special operations forces. You see, Barry? It was possible. Decimated them. But then, of course, we stole an election. Papa Joe came in. And right now, at present, ISIS is stronger than ever before. They have regenerated, reconstituted. Afghanistan is now a hotbed for the Taliban. The Taliban controls all aspects of government. And in fact, another episode for another day, we still send the Taliban, these killers, $40 million every single week from the good old United States of America. So I will end this and simply say, where is your righteous indignation, women? You love rape. You love killing. You love brutality. You love dismemberment. You love burning. You love everything known to man as long as it is a Muslim doing it to someone else. Take your protest and shove them up your... Until next time on the Comfortable in Chaos podcast, I bid you bon voyage, my burgeoning flock.
Until next time, like and subscribe to the Comfortable in Chaos podcast.